do about it, but anyway, okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Well, Joanna Wu joins us tonight to talk about the most overlooked birds in North America, females. Female birds are generally more drab and inconspicuous than males, which has led over time to an unconscious bias towards male birds when bird watching, photography, and even in ornithological knowledge. Joanna's talk will explore the history of the focus on male birds, female vocalizations, conservation implications of overlooking female birds, and female bird identification tips. Joanna is a PhD student studying, guess what, female birds in ecology and evolutionary biology at UCLA. She did her undergraduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, and received her master's from the University of Hawaii, Hilo. She is interested in conservation gaps caused by overlooking female birds and is passionate about supporting underrepresented voices. Joanna is a member of the Galbatross Project, a group of birders, scientists, writers, and conservationists who are dedicated to spreading awareness of female birds. Galbatross first came together to count feathered females at the 2019 World Series of Birding and created Female Bird Day, which is happening this May 27th to 29th, and encourages people to look for female birds and compile data on their traits such as behaviors, vocalizations, and physical features. When she's not working on her PhD, Joanna enjoys spending time with her 8-year-old daughter, running and birding while running. If you have any questions during the talk, please write it in the chat and we'll get to them. And now I'd like you to please welcome Joanna Wu.
Thank you, Kathy and Patty and everyone for being here tonight. Let me know at any point if you have trouble seeing this. I think we've gotten good at Zoom, but maybe not good enough sometimes. So anyway, but yeah, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to speak with you all. So let me first start by giving some shout outs to people. I want to acknowledge the fellow members of the Galbatross Project, the 4 other members here who've been instrumental in inspiring me and also in helping compile a lot of the facts and things I'm going to talk about tonight. And I also want to acknowledge the Female Birdsong Project. That project has inspired our project to form in the first place when a group of scientists came together and said, hey, you know what, female birds sing too. Let's pay attention to that. And also to Ken Kaufman, whose article Kathy linked there. And finally, I want to thank Kathy for inviting me and Whidbey Audubon for supporting me, you all for being here again. So here is a brief outline of my talk tonight. I'm going to talk about why we should care about female birds, and then a little bit about what Female Bird Day is about. And then I'm going to talk a bit about identification in various ways, visual, vocalizations, and behavior. I can tell a lot of you here are excellent birders. I'm 100% sure a lot of you are better birders than I am, but I'm hoping that each of you will learn something new that maybe hasn't been on your radar before. And finally, it's despite these tips, sometimes it's really hard to bird for females. And lastly, I'll end with female bird song and kind of what more can you do to learn more. So the first topic is, well, why should we make a fuss about female birds? Birds are birds. We care about both sexes. We care about young adults, females, males. When I Googled birds in preparation of this presentation, the first images that came up are this one beautiful, bright male Baltimore Oriole. Now, I actually haven't seen this bird. I should have said that I'm currently living in Los Angeles, but I used to live in San Francisco, and so I've never really birdwatched in the East Coast. But I'm aware that the female looks quite different from this guy. And the second bird that comes up is another East Coast bias, which always irks me a little bit, but is this blue jay. And you probably know that jays aren't really, they don't look different by sex, but it's these vibrant colors that attract us. And then this beautiful photo of a scarlet tanager. And so the first thing they have in common is that they're like crisp, sharp, in focus photos of these bright, colorful birds. And we as humans are visual creatures, and that's what we're drawn to naturally. But what is this species? If you, oh yeah, I would love for people to interact with this presentation. If you know the identity of this bird, please put it in the chat, or if you have some guesses. And I'll give you a hint that it's related to this slide. It's okay if people aren't sure. This is a female scarlet tanager. Looks nothing like her male counterpart, and probably would be hard to distinguish from summer tanager, western, etc. So you can see why we unconsciously focus on males more, not because we're malicious, but just because they're easier to identify and we humans are drawn to those colors. Now I'm going to use some terms that I'm sure many of you have heard and some may not be as familiar with. The first is dimorphic. Dimorphic means two forms, and in the image of the eclectus parrot, when they were first kept in zoos, they were keeping the red parrots separate from the green parrots and wondering why these parrots weren't breeding. It turns out that the red is the female, right, and the green is the male bird of this parrot species, and they're so dimorphic that we thought they were different species. And then the example below is one that you all are probably familiar with. It's the California quail. It's my personal favorite bird, and the male has a funny little plume on his head, and the female has a similar shape and pattern, but except she doesn't have quite as striking of plumage coloration. This is in contrast with the word monomorphic, one form. So we've got birds like the black-crowned night heron, where adult males and females look the same and can't be told visually apart. But I should say that birds display a really diverse array of plumage colors. Males are more vibrant than females in some species, like the ones in the top row. These are neotropical birds, but in particular for neotropical birds, of the bottom row, males and females have the same coloration, so they're monomorphic and are both very bright. And of course, we have birds that display this that don't follow the pattern of males being brighter, where the female red-necked phalarope on the left and the female Wilson's phalarope, red phalarope on the right, are more vibrant than the males are. They have a breeding behavior where females will defend multiple territories and have multiple mates, and females do not do nest care duties, whereas the males do. If anyone has seen the breeding plumage of these, let us know in the chat, because I would love to see one of these species in their summer plumage in the Arctic. Okay, so this is just this kind of unconscious bias against the duller birds is prevalent in photography and art. We've just passed the Christmas season, where we've certainly seen the images of cardinals representing the male cardinal, and in photography, we favor the brighter males in hummingbirds, for example. This is prevalent in naming. In the bird on the left is a blue, it's as much of a blue grosbeak as her male counterpart, but there's nothing blue about this grosbeak. And then the bird on the top on the right is a female red-winged blackbird. It throws off a lot of birders in the spring when they first see them, because it looks like a sparrow until you recognize its shape and the conical shape of its bill. So yeah, like the article that Ken Kaufman wrote, it really challenges you to be a better birder, to focus on shape and traits and size when you look for females. So this is just like a funny a passage about naming that my friend from the Galbatross Project found. Like other ladies, the little feathered brides have to bear their husbands' names, however inappropriate. What injustice! Here, an innocent creature with an olive green back and yellowish breast has to go about her days known as the black-throated blue warbler, just because that happens to describe the dress of her spouse. Yeah, I mean, this is a black-throated blue warbler, and it's an apt name only for half of the species. This bias is very prevalent in bird watching, as I've described. In this article, Ken describes a birder who wouldn't put a bird on their life list unless they saw an adult male. It doesn't make sense to me, because you're saying half the population doesn't count as that species. To me, as a scientist, what matters to me, what got me into thinking about my PhD project, is that there's actually conservation implications in some cases of not thinking about sexes separately. We've got the female golden wing warbler here on the right and the male on the bottom here. And they, of course, are together in the breeding season and are generally monogamous, but it turns out that in the wintering season, the females and males of this species separate in the habitats that they use. So this paper by Dr. Bennett found that females use lower elevation forests than males do. The forest types that they use look like these images from a report she wrote, but females just kind of tend to choose the image on the right, where it's a little bit lower elevation. Those areas tend to get less precipitation, and they may have smaller trees, more vines, etc., lower canopy height. Those are some of the traits of the habitats of females compared to males. This is in Central America, but because of the great difference in elevation, it's easier for folks to log the lower elevation areas, and so the habitats that are more female biased actually lost twice as much of their of this habitat as the habitats that male golden wings occur in. So you can imagine what sorts of implications this has for population growth for when the species flies back to North America and tries to breed. What happens to the females that use that habitat? You know, are they able to move up in elevation, or what happens to them when they find that their habitat is destroyed at a higher rate? So this study got me thinking, hey, it's important to think about sexes separately in a conservation context. A lot of other folks have studied warblers, and it turns out that there might be a dominance thing going on where males are more dominant than females. In the example of the black and white warbler, mangrove habitats are superior habitats, and scrub habitats are sort of the more marginal areas for this species. And also higher levels in the canopy are better for the bird than the understory. And they found that the proportion of males is higher in the mangrove, both in the mangrove forest and in the higher levels of the canopy compared to the understory, whereas females tend to occupy the more marginal habitats. Again, this seems to be due to dominance, that when you remove the males, the females fill in the spaces that the males occupied. So it's kind of interesting to think that, hey, birds are actually segregating the habitats that they use, and their males and females are not always found together, especially during the non-breeding season when they don't have to be. Another conservation implication is the case of the wandering albatross. in this extreme example, females are larger and forage closer to the equatorial areas, but those are the areas that tend to overlap more with long-line fishing. And in this article by Dr. Jimenez on the left, they actually found long-line fishing to have disproportionate impacts on females compared to males in certain areas. But I read more about this, and it's not a prevalent trait that females are negatively impacted. And in other parts of the pelagic areas, males and females are not caught in different proportions. So there's some sort of mixed evidence, but nonetheless interesting to think about how human impacts can have different levels of influence on male and female birds. Another topic I'm interested in is climate change and how that impacts sexes differently, and whether it does or not. It's kind of a newer topic of question, and one paper I've been able to find on this topic found that in an extreme case in the wedge-tailed shearwater, the female is the only one that incubates in this case, and during a flooding event, she had mortality due to flooding. That's climate related. Again, I think that kind of example is pretty extreme, but it can happen with climate change happening more and more. An aspect of climate change that's studied relatively more than other aspects of climate change is timing, synchrony, and asynchrony. So migration phenology, basically. And we've got the imagine time on the x-axis and how many birds are migrating at the different times of the year. Males tend to arrive in North America from the neotropical migrants a little bit earlier than females to set up their breeding territories. So you see a peak of females arriving after that. And with climate change and the springs advancing, we would expect both of them to shift their phenology to arrive a little bit earlier. But what my lab mates have found is that males are indeed advancing their migration phenology, but females are not advancing it at the same rate as males. So they're kind of lagging behind. And it's unclear yet what that means for the population. If they're not overlapping enough, what does that mean for their breeding biology? Are they able to reproduce successfully? And those sorts of questions are really important going forward. Now, these questions are hard to answer for a variety of reasons. One of which is that there's a scientific bias in how data is collected. I'm sure a lot of folks use eBird. I am a big fan of eBird, and we use it in our lab quite a bit to analyze data. But on the mobile app in eBird, you can enter all these breeding codes like flyover, agitated behavior, territorial defense, etc. But they don't have any code to enter whether you've encountered a male or female. So eBird lacks the data on sex-specific observations. And I have brought this up with various people. We've brought it up with folks who designed the app in Cornell, but they were like, "Oh, really? You can't enter this information? I didn't know that," and they didn't really. And they said, "Okay, we'll look into it," and they still haven't updated the app, as far as I know. On the desktop version, if you are somebody who enters in your checklist on your computer, you can select sex there. But a lot of people do use the mobile app rather than desktop. So it's a pretty lacking feature that the biggest citizen science app doesn't have the option to collect data on sex. So if you all do me a favor and go email the folks that make the eBird app and ask for this feature, just do a feature request, I would appreciate it. The more people that ask, probably the more fires light under them would be better. And in museum collections, there's an unconscious bias toward male birds too. This is a collection of hummingbirds from the LA Museum of Natural History, and they're easier to spot, easier to identify to the species, and prettier, so people tend to collect more of males. For some reason, that bias is also true in mammal collections as well as bird collections, according to this study by Dr. Cooper. And finally, in biology, I've been involved for many years surveying for birds and collecting data on them. And I agree that a lot of our methods are male biased. When you go out and if you do a breeding bird survey, you are listening for birds singing, and males do tend to sing more than females do. And when people go out and do playback surveys to try to catch birds, males respond more to playbacks. So a lot of these survey methods tend to catch more. So we just have less data on females, and I believe that is a problem because they're not always the same, and we shouldn't assume males and females are equal in science. So this background are some reasons that I'm interested in spreading awareness about female birds, and that me and my colleagues formed the Galbatross Project. The Galbatross Project was established in 2019 with these folks here, and in the first year, like Kathy mentioned, Martha, Perdita, and Stephanie went out and joined the World Series of Birding in New Jersey. They went out with a mission to only count female birds. And of all the teams that participated, they got second to last, even though these three are like just amazing birders that lead bird walks all the time. But because they were only looking for females, they got something like 27 species total in that day, beating out only a group of toddlers. So they got second to last place in that competition. And they came back and said, hey, it's really hard. There were so many birds they couldn't tell if they definitively saw the female, or if they suspect, even if it was a flock of monomorphic birds and there's got to be females in there, they didn't count that species. So amazingly hard to look for females. And so we established something called Female Bird Day, which is actually Female Bird Weekend, and it happens every year over Memorial Weekend, where we encourage folks to go out and look for female birds in the neighborhood around them. This year it's going to be May 27th to 29th. So yeah, it's just a time to mindfully search for female birds and appreciate them, and really hone your identification skills as well. Speaking of identification, here are some tips for the species that you might encounter. I'm going to start with some more obvious ones, such as birds that are visibly dimorphic. So with the northern flicker, which I'm hearing a lot in my neighborhood now that it's winter, the male has that black mustache spot there, and the female lacks that. We've got a very obvious example here with house finches being usually red. Sometimes the adult males are orange. But this is a case where it's hard to tell the female apart from the immature because they look like brown with streaks. So of course, if you're looking at a bird on the right in the height of the breeding season, you can be or in the early breeding season or in spring, you can be pretty sure it's a female. But if it's, September or October, it's very likely that it could be an immature. So it's very hard to tell those apart. The Streeter sage grouse. Has anyone seen this species? I would love to see this bird living. But yeah, the male is very much different from a female sage-grouse hen. And then this species represents my title slide here, the belted kingfisher. This is a rare case where the name of the bird is named after the female. She has the red belt across the chest on the left, and the male doesn't have that. The American Birding Association named the belted kingfisher as their bird of the year for 2023, which I'm excited about, and they were sure to use a female belted kingfisher, so that was nice for a change. Did you know that European starlings are dimorphic as well? Female starlings have a little bit of pinkish at the base of the bill, whereas males are a solid gray at the base of their bill there. This in practice is really hard to tell in the field, but you get some individuals that are just really vibrant. You can look for that bill coloration. There's relative size as well. So many of you may be aware that in raptors, females are larger than males. This is the American kestrel. And even though she's standing behind the male, you can see that she's actually quite large, and she's a little bit larger than the male kestrel. And in this case, the female is dominant, probably related to size, just like how male warblers are dominant and are slightly larger than female warblers in general. Here on the left, we've got a picture with two raptors here, and I want to ask if anyone knows the ID of this species on the left, and if you have a guess, please do drop it in the chat. These two birds belong to the same species, and the female is quite a bit larger than the male. She's molting as well. You can see new feathers coming in. You probably have a guess. Maybe you're going between one of two possible species, one of two likely species for this image. The bird on the left here.
So far, nobody has ventured a guess.
Yeah, that's okay. Do you have a guess, Kathy, by chance? Not to put you on the spot.
I'm not sure. Let me see. Oh, okay. A Cooper's.
Yeah, great. Thank you for participating. Yeah, and you'd be right. It's either a Cooper's or a Sharpshin, and in this case, it is a Cooper's hawk. I think there's the largeness of the head is one indication that it's a Cooper's versus a Sharpshin, but I'm not giving you really enough information to tell, so that's a very brave guess. Appreciate that. And yeah, the bird on the right is a great horned owl. This is a pair with a male on the left, and the female in this case is so much larger. She might just be more fluffed up too. And let me play this call too. Yeah, so what's happening here is that there's two owls here and they're duetting. It starts out with a higher pitched call, and the higher pitched bird is actually the female, even though she's larger. I always have to remember this, confusing. So the female leads off and the male gives a deeper hoot, and they often duet to each other. I have a pair of great horned owls even in my Los Angeles neighborhood, and they're sexually dimorphic by sound. It's fun to try to listen to that, and you can really only tell which one's lower, which one's higher when they're duetting together. So next time you hear this behavior, I encourage you to stop and listen and see if you can tell the sex of these birds. Okay, so that was an example of vocal dimorphism. Birds can be behaviorally dimorphic in swallow species like this tree swallow. The only bird that removes the fecal sac from the nest is the female. So it's sort of like a little diaper sack, and birds clean up their nest that way with a fecal sac. But in this case, only the female does it, the swallows. There are behaviors like nest building. In many species, both sexes take part in nest building, but in some other species, only the females do it. So any kind of flycatcher like this kingbird here, only the females will build the nest, as well as the black-capped chickadee and other chickadees. And again, in a lot of species, both partners will incubate, but in this case, in these species, only the females incubate. So if you ever see a Canada goose, American robin, song sparrow, or any kind of flycatcher, whether you can ID it or not, sitting on the nest, it's going to be a female bird. There's also pair feeding behavior that folks might have seen. And this is common in terns, like the common tern. Blue jays do this as well as cedar waxwing and northern cardinal. And in this behavior, males will kind of do a courtship feeding and feed females some food while they're in the springtime or while they're forming their pair bonds. Now, this is a crazy photo where a common merganser female has, these are not all her ducklings, but they just have this imprinting behavior to follow other ducklings, and a bunch of different clutches happen to join together and follow this one female, and this person got an amazing photo of that. So there's a common conception that female birds do the lion's share of caring for young. And that's true to some extent, but to some extent, it's probably an assumption held over from mammals and that we humans apply to birds. In mammals, it is definitely true that the females of many species tend to care for the young a lot more than males more do. But in birds, across the taxonomy, across the phylogeny of birds, it's quite mixed, that more often than not, both sexes care for the young. And finally, despite all these tips and tricks, it's really hard, and I am constantly learning and being challenged when I go out and look for female birds. Here are some examples of birds that are really hard to tell apart. I read that in mourning doves, the blue around their eye and the lores is more vibrant in male birds, and the blackness of the spot is more vibrant in males. But with these two birds side by side, it's really hard to tell, and I wouldn't feel comfortable calling this which one is a male, which one's a female. Oh, this is a fun one. I'm not sure if you guys have acorn woodpeckers, but does anyone have a guess which one is male and which one's female? This is really subtle, but they're a little bit different. The two individuals on the top are a little bit different from each other.
Do people want to write that in the chat if they know?
Okay, if you take a guess, it's 50-50.
Oh, I think I know which one. I was just seeing if somebody was going to say, but oh, okay. Well, okay, people are saying female on the right. Male has more red on the head.
You guys are very smart. Maybe I can't teach you anything at all, but I love that. Thank you for participating. You're absolutely right. The male has more red, and so the redness of his feathers touch the white patch above his bill. Whereas in females, there's a strip of black separating the white from the red. I mean, when I first saw acorn woodpeckers, I mean, these two individuals look almost the same. It's just, this is such a subtle trait, but it's really fun to find those and then be able to tell the sexes apart. You certainly have this up in Whidbey, pileated woodpecker. if you see a bird with a red spot, that's the male. Again, in woodpeckers, male tend to have more red on their head, both in the crest and on their faces. And the one on the right is a female pileated woodpecker. Here's another really subtle one. We have a lot of cedar waxwings right now. The male has a darker throat patch, so the male is the one on the left, and the female has a lot less black on her throat. Okay, do folks know this about black oyster catchers and American oyster catchers? This is probably my favorite tip, my favorite identification trick, is that the amount of black speck in the oyster catcher's eye differs by sex. So I read this genetic study that said it's something like over 90% certainty that females have this speck that extends out of their eye. Is this the pupil? I think this is the pupil. And then the males just have a clean kind of a pupil spot there. So next time when you're out at the coast, watching these wonderful and really fun, funky birds, please do look for that, and look for that kind of like a pigmentation in their eye spot. We don't know why. The authors didn't conjecture as to why this is the case. Maybe it helps them distinguish sexes within the species. And as far as I know, it's only for oyster catchers and not for other shorebird species. But going along with shorebirds, another fact that I love is that their bills are slightly different between the sexes. So both male and female avocets can get that wonderful orange coloration on their back, but the males have a longer, straighter bill. So in this case, the one on the bottom is a male because he has a longer bill and it's less decurved than the female, which is quite a bit decurved up. So kind of crazy. And they think that this is a case where the subtle differences in their bill shapes allows them to exploit different resources in the mud, that when pairs forage together, they're not like directly competing for the same foraging spots. But then, of course, when you get a bird like this in fall migration, it's yellow warbler. Even identifying it to a species is hard because we've got natural warblers and other similar looking warblers. But if you see this individual during fall migration, it could just as well be a male warbler that was born a couple months ago that hasn't grown his orange stripes, or a female warbler that could be like 5 years old who looks just like a young male. So time of year is really critical for identification of species whose immatures look like females. And then finally, we've got species like the American coot that is absolutely impossible to tell apart. There's no sign at all of just by looking at this bird, whether it's a male or female, because they look identical. Maybe if you see it one laying an egg, then you'll know, but sometimes it's just really hard. And same with birds like Anna's hummingbird. I find hummingbirds very tricky also because they breed so early in the winter. But I believe in this case, the sort of the iridescent throat feathers are growing in, indicating that this is a young male. And then in some birds, only the males sing. That's the case for the song sparrow. So when you hear a song sparrow singing, it's going to be the male. You can't tell them apart visually, but this is a case where singing is a good clue. And on that note, I want to talk about something really cool, the Female Bird Song Project, started by a group of researchers listed here, where basically they went out and found that looking at the pie chart on the left, graph A, that of the species that have information on sex-specific song, female song is actually present in 2/3 of those of that subset of information that we know. So, you know, when I first started doing bird surveys in the Sierra Nevada mountains, I was taught if you hear a bird singing, you can assume it's male, and we kind of roughly double the number of males we count to say, hey, he probably has a mate, and that's probably approximately the population size. But it turns out that in wrens especially is a group that all sexes sing, and females even have female specific songs. It's just, you know, that assumption would fly out the window because sometimes there'd be the songs that I was hearing would probably belong to females. And then there's also complications like studies finding that single unpaired males sing at a higher rate than paired males who are breeding and maybe defending territories. So if you are going to double those and assume that there's a female for every singing male, you're actually overestimating the population size, which can lead to inaccurate conservation decisions. So yeah, so I do want to challenge the notion that we often hold that female birds don't sing, because in this subset, maybe up to 2/3 of female birds do have song. And they went on to do many studies, so I certainly would recommend looking up the Female Bird Song Project if you're interested in reading more about them. And they found that the common ancestors of songbirds, of passerines, likely had female song. So it's a trait that's very common. In the red indicates bird groups where female song was present. And it seems that female song was lost subsequently rather than males evolving their own particular song. But that's just evolutionarily what they think is most likely what happened. All right, I'm nearing the last couple slides of my presentation, so I want to tell you about some fun things that I've been involved with. As I talked about with photography, we humans are drawn to the brighter individuals, and when I worked at the National Audubon Society, I was looking in the photos database and looking for female birds for certain things, and I found that, boy, they were just almost non-existent. That the database consisted almost entirely of bright individuals or birds that you can't tell, that are monomorphic. So I had a conversation. I ended up was casually chatting with the director of photography, and I told her I had a really hard time finding images of female birds. Why, there's a big bias in the way that the collection is curated. And she said, yeah, that's a good point. I've never thought about that. And the following year, they initiated the first female bird prize in the Audubon Photography Awards, which was super exciting because it encourages photographers to share their photos of female birds, and also I think it raises awareness about, hey, like we care about females in photography. We don't just want the brightest colors or the most stunning male that you can find. And they invited the 5 Galbatrosses to be the judges of the Female Bird Prize, which has just been so much fun to look through those stunning images. So in 2021, our first Female Bird Prize winner was this image of the northern harrier, which I totally love for a couple of reasons. It was taken from the West Coast, and this bird is, yeah, the lighting is astonishing. the background is perfectly, it's just such a good quality image. So I was thrilled to be able to do this. And then I believe you can also tell the age of harriers by their eyes. So this one, because it has dark brown eyes, was identified to be. Ooh, I am forgetting now if yellow eyes means it's an adult or if brown eye means it's an adult. But I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think that we identified this to be a juvenile because she doesn't have yellow eyes. So the amount of detail and information you can get by carefully scrutinizing a bird is one of just my favorite things about the female bird song, about the Galbatross Project. Just in 2022, the winner that we chose was a female greater sage grouse. And I love this because we always focus on the amazing images of the male sage grouse doing his lek display. And I love those images, but we've seen them so much that this one is kind of a refreshing change. She is out in the winter morning light, and I just love the sagebrush is featured as well as a important reminder of how birds are intricately tied to the habitat with which they evolved. And in this year, 2023, the photography awards have just opened as well. And we are also going to be, the Galbatrosses are going to be involved with judging those. And I encourage all of you to submit your images as well to, yeah, of course, the female bird prize would be good, but there's a relatively new video prize as well as general categories. So please do go out, photograph, and submit your images because you could win or be mentioned as a runner-up. So just a couple of slides of conclusion. I hope I've given you some evidence that female birds are not just like males, that you can't, just count the males and say, hey, we've probably got these females in the same places in the same numbers. In general, I believe they're underappreciated. They're not as flashy oftentimes and harder to bird as well. But I think like Ken argued, they bring a good challenge to look for things like body shape and such. So I encourage you all to bird the challenge. There are a lot of scientific questions that remain besides what I've presented. How else are they different? For one chapter of my dissertation, I'm currently looking at survival rates of male and females. They might incur different mortality factors. Just like in mammals, females have a higher survival rate and longer lifespan than males do. In birds, it seems to be actually the opposite pattern, where a lot of females have a lower survival rate than males do, and leading to shorter lifespans than male birds. So I'm wondering what that means and how many species is that prevalent in, etc. And then, like I had mentioned, what does climate change mean for male and female birds separately? Does it exert the same pressures on males and females, or does it not? These are big questions, and I am certainly not going to be able to find the answers in my PhD, but I'm hoping that more and more people will be able to at least ask these questions and think about birds to the level of sex and age, rather than just thinking of birds at the species level, which is what we're used to doing. So if you are on Twitter or any other kind of social media, join us by sharing your observations with the hashtag female birds or hashtag Galbatross Project. We love when people share observations, and we've learned a lot of new things mostly from Twitter, from people submitting photos or unique observations. So that's really awesome opportunity with this engagement. By the way, did you know that bush tits are sexually dimorphic? this is just an amazing fact. The female has yellow eyes and males have brown eyes. So next time you see a flock of bush tits, just look harder, and you'll surely be able to spot both sexes. So one thing that I'm really excited about is the artist Rosemary Moscow, who is amazing. Got in touch with a couple of members of the Galbatross and put together a poster on North American female birds. Again, refreshing, because most like if you play the game Wingspan or have posters or things, they're often male, represented by a male type. So she said, hey, let's do the opposite. Let's celebrate female birds. And this is a poster that you can buy here if you're interested in it. Finally, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I want to thank you all for your attention. I know it's late in the evening, so thanks for joining me. I've entered my email information as well as Twitter handle and website if you'd like to ask me questions in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for being with me this evening. And I will pass it back to Kathy and Patty for any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanna. That was so much information, and it really makes me want to go out and look and see if I can identify females. If anybody has a question, you could either raise your hand or you can write it in the chat or comments. So Mary Holland asks, do you have a link or contact information for how I can ask eBird to have the app updated to allow bird identification by gender?
Yeah, that's a good question. It might be easier for you to just do a web search of eBird feature request. I believe that's what it's called. I found that on their website, and there's like a form, and I filled out and I said, do this feature request. So I've asked them multiple times, both in person and by this feature request form. So I don't know. I'm sure it's very difficult to design an app. So, but hopefully they're aware of it.
I have a comment. This is Stephanie.
Yeah.
Oyster catchers are a favorite of mine. And when you brought up the thing about the eyes, I really get why and how this is so difficult. So I have pictures from California, Oregon, and Washington State, but they're all during the winter months, and all of them have round pupils. So it brought to my mind, well, maybe that pupil changes during breeding season. Just a curiosity. Just wanted to comment on.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. I didn't know that. And now I'm curious about that paper I read, whether they did it in the particular season or not. So, but thanks for bringing that to my attention. I'll try to find the paper afterwards and send it over to Patty so that she can pass it along.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Actually, I was wondering if a species doesn't migrate, are the females less likely to sing? Or if they migrate, would the female be more likely to sing? Do you know? Or does it make any difference?
That's a great question. I don't know right now. It might have been studied by the Female Birdsong Project. I'm not sure. What I do know is that birds living in the neotropics that are resident year round, in those cases, most of the time, males and females both sing because they're both participating in defending territories against other pairs, and because they're defending that territory year round. So in neotropical birds, the singing rate for females in North America. But I think you're asking about non-migratory North American birds, and that I don't know about.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions for Joanna?
Joanna, why don't you quit sharing your screen so that you can see everybody? And I'd like you to come off of your mute and tell her how much you appreciate her talk tonight. Come on, you can speak up. Come off of
Thank
mute.
you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Really new
Very good.
information for us.
We're always like, we always like to hear that females are getting a second chance.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
There were some interesting things. Yeah, it was
Only
great.
Females on this call.
It was challenging, and it will make me a better birder in me to be more alert.
Yes.
Appreciate everything that you covered.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yes, it was very interesting. Thank you.
Good. Well, let's give her a round of applause.
Yay.
And we can't be here in person, but boy, we can sure appreciate you. And so we do. So anybody else have a comment?
I have a comment at Sarah.
Okay.
So I recently learned from Connie Seidels that if you go to All About Birds and look up a species and click on the ID tab and scroll down, you can click on a link to more pictures of this bird and scroll through thousands and thousands of that species. So I've been scrolling through black oyster catcher and in looking at pupils, it's really cool. I'm seeing, like big non-round pupils in some of the photos, including some February ones. Anyway, that's fascinating. Thank you so much, Joanna. It was really good. I just really appreciate your raising our awareness about female birds. I definitely want to look closer.
Well, it's really interesting to me that whenever I see some of them, that they are really very pretty and we just don't notice them very much. And I think that's really good that we are becoming aware of them.
American Redstart.
Yeah.
I wonder what the female. You only see 5 males on this 25 block screen. I don't know what the rest are. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Joanna. And we are so glad that you came tonight. And we have an honorarium for you. I would be handing it to you if you were here, but I can't do that. So it will be mailed. And I hope you get it okay, because our mail service is not the greatest here on the island. And I shouldn't say that, but it's true. I went 3 days this week without any mail. And in my neighborhood didn't get their mail either. So
I hope you all aren't too affected by the rains. It's been very wet in California, but I'm not too. It's tragic. There's some bad things happening, but it's also helping our drought a lot. So there's some silver lining here.
Young people who are doing research.
Okay. Thanks again. And I'm really glad to see you all. And if anybody wants to come to the board meeting, it's on January 26th at 6 o'clock at Freeland Library. So if you want to come and you want to talk about something, please do come. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Joanna. It was very interesting.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Patty, could I talk to you for a minute after?
Yes.
Thank you, Joanna.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I try